Once upon a time, we lived in a sandbox with no special weapons. Sounds boring? Well, it was. Pretty awful, actually. It was all of year 1 of Destiny 2, but surprisingly, the weapon type that was considered to be the strongest that year was actually SMGs. One SMG that slipped through the cracks as being an SMG that was one of the most stable, most reliable SMGs in the game was known as Death Adder. Now, Death Adder was punished because there was only static rolls back then. We didn't have random rolls, meaning this is all you got right here. Hipfire Grip, steady rounds, and a couple barrel perks. Honestly, it would have been one of the most used SMGs in year 1 had it just had a better static roll. Now though, it has returned in Season of Arrivals with random rolls. Dropping from the dungeon, guys, I want to say it's only dropping from the cube encounter. If it's dropped for you elsewhere, feel free to let us know, but currently I believe it is only locked to the dungeon. Now, I got a roll a few weeks ago. I liked it. It looked good for the most part. But Aaron Pureheart here actually reached out to me with what I would have deemed to be the God roll. Now, first up, before we even get into it, this weapon is in that lightweight archetype. Superb handling, move faster with the weapon while it's equipped. You can probably tell from the model of the weapon, looks very similar to Recluse. Or better yet, Recluse looks very similar to Death Adder. Remember, Death Adder came first. There's something about this gun model. Maybe it's the foundry being that Vice foundry, but something about Vice SMGs, they're just super reliable, consistent, stable, manageable, and considering that this is a 900 round per minute SMG, that's what you need. You need an SMG that you can handle. It can be the best SMG in the world, but if it's a bullet hose and you can't control it, you can kiss every gunfight goodbye. Now, this roll right here came with Corkscrew Rifling for that increase in range and stability. It does have full bore underneath it, which we'll go over here in just a moment. Accurized rounds for that bump there in range. Dynamic sway reduction, which just got a buff, by the way. Improves accuracy and stability while continuously holding down the trigger. Now, a buff that I noticed here recently on auto rifles as being one that seems to have been improved. Now, a lot of people are saying there's no change or difference than what it was doing pre-Season of Arrivals. I haven't really done a side-by-side comparison. This is kind of subjective. Dynamic, though, was already such a good trait even to begin with. The initial bump in accuracy seems to be more on the front end of a gunfight. A very small improvement, probably one that we wouldn't really notice, and there was a lot of people that would scrap their weapons that had dynamic sway. But when we talk about the holy trinity of perks, dynamic has always been in the conversation. Right next to it is rangefinder for that bump there in range and zoom magnification. Yep, lo and behold, fellas, Death Adder almost has the holy trinity. And again, to me, the holy trinity is dynamic sway for that increase in accuracy and stability, rangefinder for the increase there in range, and I would have preferred scopes instead of barrel perks here. But Bungie's not going to do that with Death Adder. It's still going to have barrel perks, very much still a Vice weapon, so that's what we're stuck with. So no, it doesn't quite have the Holy Trinity, but man, is it close. Now, being a 900 round per minute SMG, it falls actually in that 15 impact archetype, putting it right in line with, yes, you guessed it, Recluse. So not only do the weapons look identical, they're pretty much identical in every single way, until we actually start looking at stats. Recluse has been known to be one of the most consistent SMGs in the game, and at one time, even among special weapons, Recluse with Master of Arms was reigning terror. Could hit 25 damage per crit with Master of Arms and 25 damage per body. It had a stupid time to kill value of 0.47 seconds and remained the most dominant SMG in both PvE and in PvP. Death Adder doesn't nearly have that level of potency, but neither does Recluse. Recluse has since been nerfed. On top of that, not only has it been nerfed in its damage category, but it actually had the ability to reach past its optimal range and remain sticky. Something of which Bungie mentioned that was not intentional. It is meant to only be optimal within 15 meters or less. At 16 really starts to stretch that bullet magnetism. Something that you may not notice that much on mouse and keyboard, but it definitely becomes even more noticeable for controller users. Death Adder here, though, falling within that same archetype, puts it at an optimal time to kill of 0.67 seconds at 9 crits to body. This is, of course, hitting 19 damage per crit and 11 per body. Now, when we actually sit down and compare certain SMGs, you've got your 15 impacts that are your 900 round per minute SMGs, but you also have another archetype that's also 900 round per minute SMGs, but they're 20 impact variants. The key differences between both of these is their intrinsic perks. 20 impacts are adaptives, while lightweights are your 15s, allowing you to move a little quicker and your weapons to be a little more fluid for you with that increase in handling. Something else that adaptives have by default is, on average, they have a higher range stat. Now, what made Recluse so special was that it actually surpassed that of adaptive SMGs. It had a base default range stat much higher than even our adaptives, and it still retained that lightweight intrinsic perk. Unfortunately, Death Adder, when we sit down and actually compare the two stat-wise, it is lacking in a lot of categories because there was no stats that was personally catered to this SMG. It's pretty much your run-of-the-mill lightweight SMG, meaning it gets beat on just about every level by Recluse except for magazine size, which is unfortunate, I know. But can the rolls on this SMG allow it to surpass that of Recluse? Well, actually, yeah. Stat-wise, Death Adder can actually surpass that of Recluse by a good margin. And we actually start sitting down and comparing the damage fall off for both of these weapons. Death Adder would say something like full bore without a ranged masterwork is actually able to reach all the way up to 18 meters. And with something like a ranged masterwork, that'll probably stretch even further to 19 meters, maybe 20. Put that in comparison, something like Recluse can only reach up to 16 meters. So it's got it beat on the range front. Where it doesn't have it beat is unfortunately in its magazine perks. So something I want to bring up. First up, let's just take a look at the random rolls. Notice in the magazine column, when it comes to something like PvP, ricochet rounds is kind of king, right? You get a small bump there in range, as well as a bump there in stability. Consider that this is a 900 round per minute SMG, any bump in stability is necessary. So even though this weapon does come with accurized rounds, which does give it a nice hefty bump there in range, plus 10 instead of plus 5, there's nothing aiding that stability, which means we're gonna have to front load on possibly our barrel perks. Honestly, right here, guys, I would go small bore. I know full bore gives you that plus 15, when we talk about reaching ranges of 18 and 19. My experience, though, was not really good. Even with something like Corkscrew Rifling, I felt like the weapon was a little unmanageable, which is the direct opposite of what we felt like back in year one when reviewing Death Adder. But understand, back then, the static roll had steady rounds, which gave it a plus 15 there in stability, which of course made the weapon feel extremely stable. I'm almost on the fence after playing with this weapon of saying that you should just roll it with steady rounds. Yes, you get minus 5 there in range, which does suck, but hopefully when we back in it with certain traits like rangefinder, it'll make up for that. Which actually takes us to our traits here. I tried a combination of things. I actually tried out Hipfire Grip on one roll just to see how it felt. Hipfire actually got a buff here in this past sandbox. My experience with Hipfire, yes, it's good, but at the same time, you're hipfiring with an SMG that might allow you to get away with it inside of PvE, but inside of PvP, it's hard to do, man. You're gonna be missing some shots, obviously extending that optimal time to kill. Even when I stack things like Hipfire Grip and Freehand Grip together, I found that the weapon just didn't reliably secure the kill for me before, say, a fell winner met me, right? And maybe if I took the route of like Hipfire Grip, quick draw together, have the immediate swap with, say, something like Freehand as well, proceed to backpedal, and yeah, maybe that could have worked. For me though, guys, even though Hipfire Grip does feel better on most other weapons, this weapon still had a hell of a lot of hop, which is why Dynamic Sway seemed like an obvious choice. Something of which would aid this weapon, considering that its fast rate of fire would kick in Dynamic Sway extremely quickly. The trait seemed like a no-brainer. Matter of fact, when we actually sit down and start testing recoil of this weapon, we see Dynamic Sway here at work, both when shooting from the hip, as well as aiming down sights. But this is me shooting Death Adder without any stability boosting perks, except for what Dynamic Sway could offer. I don't have any barrel perks here. I'm actually rocking full bore. So I'm actually hurting my stability even more, dropping it into that 30 range, which to me really killed the consistency of this weapon. Even though Dynamic Sway is performing better, you can't entirely rely on it. You still gotta have help, which I thought the Stability Masterwork would make up for that. But even with the Stability Masterwork, I still felt like the weapon retained some level of recoil that surpassed that of Recluse. It was actually bizarre to me. I don't know what it is about Recluse. I know it has a good base default stability stat, but I had stability stats that was putting it close to Recluse's level, and even then, Recluse just retained some level of consistency that surpasses that of other lightweight SMGs. About the only other SMGs that I feel like they can go head-to-head against something like Recluse in terms of stability are actually our Amelon SMGs, things like Stochastic Variable. Those are some of the best feeling SMGs I ever play with, and if they ever get brought back, hands down, I will drop every one of these SMGs for that thing. On top of that, Stochastic and other Amelan SMGs, they come with scopes, allowing them to have even more range. So my review of Death Adder, at least for PvP, it's a difficult weapon to handle. I wish it was easier to control, similar to say something like Recluse, but there's just something about Recluse that still has an edge. Could be a combination of all these stats being superior, but at least for this role, it just wasn't enough. What I would have preferred is actually something like small bore, maybe even hammerforged rifling. Combine that with either accurized rounds or steady rounds, dynamic sway and rangefinder steel with the stability masterwork on top of that. Now, it really sounds like we're overloading ourselves in stability, and I'm here to say, guys, it's almost necessary. That is, of course, if you're looking to stay in that 18-19 meter range before seeing damage fall off. If you're looking for just a consistent SMG, if you're fine with that 15-16 meter range, well, hell, still go something like quick draw, dynamic sway, or maybe even dynamic sway and moving target together. And moving target might actually do a lot more for this SMG than what rangefinder was doing. Overall, though, it is clear to see that Death Adder does have more recoil than something like Recluse, thus making it a little less inconsistent. Now for PvE, this SMG is 100% a weapon you should lock down. Two roles I really want you to get, guys. First up, Dragonfly and Subsistence. Yeah, you can't go wrong with it. Now I know some of you are like, whoa, what about Feeding Frenzy in Dragonfly? Understand Feeding Frenzy got a pretty significant nerf. Even though Recluse still feels like a good SMG, one of the most noticeable differences in this sandbox is the nerf to Feeding Frenzy. Recluse does not feel the same as it did in PvE. It's still good, still has Master of Arms, but not having that ready reload speed at every single encounter is a major bummer. On top of that, just keep this in mind, Recluse sunsets next season, whereas Death Adder won't sunset until next year. Disruption Break, though, guys, is fantastic, and I might even go for something like auto-loading holster and Disruption Break together for running and gunning situations, especially against champs. We get something like anti-barrier rounds for SMGs again. Bam. Now you got a weapon that's tacking on increased damage for your kinetics. It's a great trait combination to go with. Top of that, make sure you load it out with a magazine perk. Tactical mag is more preferable, but a pendant mag is not bad. So guys, that is our review for Death Adder. Honestly, I know I ragged on this SMG, at least when it came to Crucible. I had high hopes for the dynamic sway and rangefinder combo, and I felt like that trait combination is still a good one, but you can't expect rangefinder and dynamic to take care of everything. Highly advise, guys, if you're looking to make Death Adder a top contender SMG for you, especially in this sandbox, load some stability stats out. Don't go too heavy on range with things like full bore. Choose your different barrel perks, small bore, corkscrew rifling, maybe even a little bit of hammer forge if you can live without the stability, and roll with that instead. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.